Eldermore was once a peaceful town, resting between the endless dark forest and the silver river, place where mornings began with the sound of temple bells and evenings ended with laughter across the stone streets. But everything changed on the night of the crimson eclipse, when the sky turned blood red and the earth trembled like a giant awakening from sleep. And by the time dawn arrived, 300 people were gone without a single trace. Families, soldiers, merchants, and priests all vanished as if swallowed by the night. Doors remained open, food lay half-eaten, candles still burned, and silence pressed on every home like an unseen weight. Fear spread quickly through the town. The king's soldiers searched every path, every riverbank, and every hidden cave, but no clue was found. Whispers of curses and divine punishment filled the air, yet no one could explain the strange dark marks burned into the stones where the vanished once stood. It was in this moment that Alina appeared, the daughter of a scholar not known for strength of arms, but for the sharpness of her mind. She had grown among her father's forbidden books, where ancient pages spoke of kingdoms lost and secrets buried. Most people feared those words, but she read them with hunger, and when she saw the strange marks, she felt not fear, but recognition, for she remembered them from fragments of prophecy that spoke of a night when shadows would claim the innocent, and only one would dare to seek the truth. The crown offered gold to any who could explain the vanishing, but no knight, no priest, no wise man could answer. The people prayed, but the gods remained silent, and Alina understood that if no one stepped forward, the darkness would spread. With only her father's old journal, a dim lantern, and a torn piece of verse that spoke of fire, stone, and silence, she left the safety of her home and walked toward the forest. The trees stood tall like guards of forgotten time. Every branch that cracked under her step echoed like a warning, and every shadow seemed to whisper, but still she moved forward, because something deep within told her that the vanished were not lost, but trapped behind a veil older than the kingdom itself. Her heart beat fast with both fear and courage, for in that moment she knew the fate of the missing, and perhaps the fate of Eldermore itself rested in her hands. And as the last lights of the town disappeared behind her, she entered the waiting darkness where destiny itself was hidden. Alina moved deeper into the forest, where silence pressed heavier with each step. The lantern in her hand threw a faint glow against the towering trunks, and every rustle of leaves sounded like whispers of unseen watchers. She remembered her father's words, that knowledge was both a gift and a burden, and in that moment she felt the weight of both pressing on her chest. Yet her resolve did not weaken, for behind the terror of the vanished, she sensed a pattern, a hidden story waiting to be uncovered. The forest was old, older than the kingdom itself, and its roots carried memories no man could read. Shadows shifted as if following her, though when she turned, she saw nothing but the thick branches above. She found a narrow trail winding between rocks marked faintly with the same strange signs she had seen scorched into the stones. In Eldermore, she knelt and traced them with her fingers, feeling a pulse as if the stone itself was alive. Her heart raced, and she quickly noted the shapes into her father's journal, knowing that these marks were not random. They were part of the prophecy she had once read only half of, but the half she knew spoke of a gate hidden where silence ruled, and where light would bend away. Unwilling to enter, she walked further until the air grew colder and the forest floor sank into mist. The sound of the town bells was gone, only her own breath echoed around her. She reached a clearing where the ground was blackened as if fire had raged, yet no tree was burned. In the center stood a single stone pillar, taller than any man, covered with the same markings glowing faintly in the dark. She stepped closer, the air around it humming like a song trapped inside stone. When she touched it, the lantern flickered, and her father's torn verse slipped from her hand. The words aligned with the marks perfectly, and she understood that this was the first key. The prophecy was not simply about loss, it was about a door, a passage meant to be open only in the time of great darkness. Her hands trembled, for she realized that the vanished 300 had not been destroyed. They had been taken beyond this door, to a place unseen, and perhaps a place unreturnable. Before she could think further, the ground shook and the pillar began to crack. A deep voice, not human, but ancient, echoed through the clearing, warning her to turn back and abandon the search. Fear clawed at her, yet courage forced her feet to remain still. She whispered to herself that if she stepped back now, the truth would be lost forever. With a trembling breath, she lifted the lantern higher and declared within her own heart that she would not stop, no matter the cost. For the fate of Eldermore and the missing 300 was no longer a mystery to avoid, but a destiny she had been chosen to face. And as the pillar burst with light brighter than fire, she was pulled forward into the unknown where her true journey began. The light that burst from the pillar swallowed Alina whole, and when her eyes opened, she was no longer in the forest of Eldermore, but in a place that felt both real and unreal, land painted in twilight, where the sky shimmered with colors she had never seen, and the air trembled with whispers that did not belong to the living. Beneath her feet stretched a path of stone, leading toward towering arches that glowed faintly, as if carved from the very stars themselves. She realized she had crossed into the realm spoken of in her father's broken verses, a place beyond the veil where time did not flow, as in the mortal world, and where the vanished had been carried. She gripped the lantern tightly, though its flame now flickered with an unnatural blue glow. She walked slowly, her heart pounding louder than her steps. Shadows moved along the arches, tall figures cloaked in darkness, watching, but never approaching, and their silence was heavier than words. She dared not speak aloud for fear her voice might awaken something that was better left dreaming. At last she reached a valley where the ground was covered in faint circles, etched deep into stone. Within each circle lay the image of a person etched like a shadow frozen in time. She gasped, recognizing faces from Eldermore, merchants she had seen in the market, children who once played in the streets, guards who once stood by the gates, all here, yet not alive and not dead. Caught between worlds, tears blurred her vision as she whispered a promise to them that she would not leave until she found the way to free them. Her words stirred the air, and suddenly the arches behind her thundered with a voice ancient and commanding. It spoke of a pact forged centuries ago, when kings desperate for power had bargained with forces beyond the stars, sealing away the lives of their own people in exchange for victory and glory. Alina felt her chest tighten, for she understood the vanished 300 were not the first, and unless she stopped this curse, they would not be the last. She opened her father's journal and traced the symbols, again realizing they were not only warnings, but also instructions. The prophecy spoke of a chosen seeker who must face trials of silence, fire, and shadow to break the chain of sacrifice. She knew then that the path before her was not only about saving the missing, but about confronting the very heart of her kingdom, a truth so dangerous it had been buried beneath lies for generations. The ground beneath her feet trembled, and from the mist rose a figure, its eyes burning with pale light, its form both human and monstrous. It spoke without moving, its lips declaring that she had entered the first trial, and that only those willing to give their own soul for others could pass. Alina stood frozen, every part of her screamed to run, but something deeper held her still. She raised her lantern, now burning brighter than before, and answered within her heart that she would walk through fire, shadow, and silence, no matter the cost. For the fate of Eldermore and the truth of its forgotten sins demanded no less. The figure watched her in silence. Then the valley dissolved into darkness, and Alina felt herself falling into the first trial of the prophecy. Alina felt her body strike the ground, yet when she opened her eyes, she was not wounded. Instead, she found herself in a vast chamber, carved from black stone, the ceiling so high, it disappeared into shadows. Torches burned along the walls though no flame touched them, and their light shone with a cold, white glow. At the center stood a circle of fire, not hot, but chilling, and she knew this was the first trial, the trial of silence. The chamber seemed alive with whispers, yet the moment she stepped inside, the air turned heavy, and every sound vanished. Even her own breath made no echo. She clutched the lantern, but its flame shrank to a faint shimmer, and she realized the silence was not ordinary, it was a force meant to break the spirit. She moved forward, and on the walls she saw carvings that told a story: kings kneeling before faceless beings, offering their people as tribute in exchange for victories won and forgotten wars. Her stomach twisted in horror, for these images confirmed what the voice had told her: the power of Eldermore had been built upon sacrifice and blood, not honor or courage. She walked deeper, the silence pressing harder against her ears, until pain throbbed in her skull. Her mind screamed, yet no sound escaped. She stumbled to her knees, but then remembered her father's voice telling her that silence could not destroy a heart filled with truth. She focused on the faces of the 300 whose shadows she had seen in the valley, and drew strength from the thought that they waited for her to endure. Her legs steadied, and she pushed forward into the circle of fire. Cold flames rose around her, and for a moment she felt herself dissolving, as though her body was nothing more than smoke. But she clutched the journal, pressing it against her chest, and whispered without sound that she would not surrender. Light erupted around her, and the flames bowed back, revealing a path beyond the chamber. There, a figure of light appeared, a woman draped in robes of starlight, who spoke without voice, her words entering directly into Alina's heart, telling her that the first trial was past, and that the path of fire awaited. She lifted a hand and showed Alina a vision of the 300 suspended between worlds, their faces pale and eyes pleading. Then the vision darkened, showing the throne of Eldermore, where the king sat with shadows coiled around him like serpents. The voice told her that the curse was not only ancient, but still fed by the greed of rulers who preferred power to truth. Alina felt rage surge inside her, but she steadied her breath and promised she would not let fear rule her steps. The figure of light faded, and the chamber shook stone, breaking and crumbling as the path ahead burst open in a blaze of red. She walked forward, her lantern burning stronger than before, its glow no longer blue, but golden, as if carrying the strength of her vow. Behind her the silence collapsed into echoes, and ahead of her the fire roared like a storm. She knew the second trial awaited, and with every step she took, the prophecy drew tighter around her, binding her to a destiny she had not chosen, but could no longer refuse. Alina stepped into the second trial, and was swallowed by fire that roared without heat, yet carried the weight of every scream ever silenced in Eldermore. The chamber stretched into an endless plain, where rivers of flame twisted like serpents across the ground, yet the air was cold, and her breath rose in mist. She realized this was the trial of fire, not to burn the body, but to test the heart. Every flame she passed whispered to her, taking the voices of those she loved. She heard her father's voice pleading with her to turn back, warning that she would be lost. She heard the laughter of children she once saw in the market, now crying in pain, begging to be freed. The voices tore at her soul, and her steps slowed. The journal in her hands grew heavy, as though it carried not words, but the grief of centuries. She fell to her knees, and for a moment she wondered if she was strong enough to endure the fire. Then she remembered the vision shown to her, the faces of the 300, and the shadow coils around the throne of her king. Rage and sorrow mingled inside her heart, and she forced herself to rise. Each step became a battle, yet with each battle she grew stronger. Flames clawed at her, reaching like hands of the lost, and she raised her lantern, which now shone with golden light so bright that the flames recoiled. she spoke. Aloud for the first time though, her voice trembled, saying that she would not surrender her people to the greed of kings nor to the hunger of shadows. Her words shook the plain, and the rivers of fire bent away, opening a path. In the distance stood a gate of molten stone, locked with 3 seals glowing like suns. She approached and felt the heat press against her skin. This was the core of the trial. She placed the journal on the ground and touched the first seal. The mark burned into her palm, but she did not cry out. Instead she held steady, and the first seal broke, releasing a burst of light. The second seal rose higher, demanding more, and she remembered every life taken by the curse. She pressed her hand against it, and though the pain seared into her bones, she remained standing until the second seal shattered. The third seal loomed, darker than the rest, and spoke in a voice that promised death if she dared touch it. She closed her eyes, whispered her vow once more, and pressed forward. Agony rushed through her, yet she did not release until the gate exploded open, light pouring like a flood. The flames vanished, leaving only ash and the sound of wings above her. She looked up and saw a figure, descending not of light nor shadow, but of balance, a guardian draped in scales of silver. It told her she had passed the trial of fire, but warned her the greatest trial yet awaited, the trial of shadow, where her own heart would be tested more than any enemy she had faced. Alina lifted her lantern, its flame steady and golden, her eyes filled with determination, and she stepped through the gate into the darkness beyond, ready for what awaited. Alina stepped through the gate and was swallowed by a darkness thicker than night, a silence deeper than the chamber she had faced before. Her lantern flickered as if its golden flame too feared the path ahead. She realized this was the trial of shadow, where not fire nor silence, but her own heart would be weighed against truth. The air was cold and heavy, yet alive with shapes that slithered around her unseen. She walked slowly, and every step echoed with memories. Voices from her past rose around her, whispering doubts that struck like blades. She saw her mother calling her weak. She saw her friends laughing at her dreams. She heard her own voice trembling with fear, telling her she was not strong enough to save anyone. Shadows formed into figures, each one a reflection of herself, yet darker, colder, merciless. They spoke of power, of ease, of surrender, telling her that if she abandoned her quest, she could live free without pain, without sacrifice. But Alina clenched her fists and lifted her lantern, its golden light casting them back, though they did not vanish. Instead, they laughed and shifted their shapes into the faces of the vanished 300. Their eyes hollow, their mouths open in silent cries. They reached for her, begging and accusing, asking why she had not saved them, why she had let them disappear. Her heart twisted, guilt pressing so hard, she fell to her knees, tears streaming as the shadows circled, chanting that she was nothing, that she was too late, that the kingdom itself was beyond saving, for its roots were rotten. She almost believed them, yet then a memory surfaced of her father placing his hand on her shoulder, telling her that truth was a burden, but also the only weapon strong enough to break chains. She rose, trembling, but unbroken. She declared aloud that she was not chosen for her strength, but for her will to carry the truth, even when it cut her. She lifted the lantern higher, and the golden flame burst outward, searing the shadows until they wailed and dissolved into mist. The darkness peeled back, revealing a mirror taller than any wall she had ever seen. Within it she saw herself not as she was, but as she could become, a queen, draped in light, leading her people into freedom. Yet behind that reflection, another appeared, her form twisted, crowned with chains, ruling not by truth, but by fear. The mirror asked her without words which destiny she would choose. Alina placed her hand against the glass, her reflection staring back with both promise and warning. She whispered that her choice was truth, no matter the pain. And the mirror cracked, exploding into shards that rained down around her, yet instead of cutting, they turned into sparks of light, guiding her. Forward she walked, through the falling glow, and emerged into a vast hall where all three trials converged: the silence, the fire, and the shadow, each leaving their mark on her spirit. And there at the center stood a throne, not of gold, but of bone, wrapped in coils of living darkness. On it sat a figure whose face she could not yet see, but whose presence made the air tremble. The voice that once warned her now welcomed her, saying she had come far, but the true test, the one that would decide the fate of Eldermore, had only just begun. Alina stood before the throne of bone, her lantern trembling in her grasp, as if even its golden flame feared the figure that sat in silence. The hall stretched endlessly, shadows clinging to every corner, yet all bowed toward the throne as if worshipping the darkness itself. The figure did not move, but its presence pressed upon her chest like the weight of mountains. Then slowly it raised its head, and though its face was veiled in shadow, she felt its eyes pierce through her soul. It spoke in a voice that echoed like thunder within her mind, telling her that she had crossed the trials of silence, fire, and shadow, but those trials were only a doorway to the truth, for the curse that bound Eldermore was not born of ancient beings alone, it was nourished by the greed of men. The figure rose from the throne, taller than any human, its cloak unraveling into streams of black mist that writhed like serpents. It told her that the kings of Eldermore had bargained with it age after age, feeding it the lives of their people in exchange for power, crowns, and victories long forgotten. Alina felt rage ignite within her chest, but also despair, for the chains of history stretched too far back for one girl to undo. The figure stretched its hand, and the hall shifted, revealing visions of every king of Eldermore bowing before the throne, their eyes empty, their voices chanting promises of blood, each sacrifice binding the land tighter to the shadow until the kingdom itself pulsed with its curse. Alina clenched her fists, remembering the 300 faces she had seen trapped between worlds. She shouted that she would end the pact, even if it meant her own life. Her words rang out, breaking through the silence, and the figure laughed, a sound that shook the hall. It told her she was brave but foolish, for to sever the pact, she would have to take the throne herself, binding her soul to the curse in place of her people. The lantern in her hand flared brighter, as though resisting the voice, but the temptation cut deep. If she sacrificed herself, the 300 could be freed, but her own life would be lost. The hall darkened, and the figure leaned closer, whispering that even her courage would wither when faced with the cost. Alina trembled, yet stood tall. She declared that the throne would not bind her, not in shadow nor in chains, for she carried truth, and truth could burn away lies, even those etched in centuries. The figure recoiled, its mist twisting violently, and the hall shuddered as cracks spread across the throne. Light leaked through the cracks, pure and golden, battling against the coils of darkness. Alina raised her lantern high, and its flame surged, becoming a pillar that struck the ceiling. The shadows screamed, pulling tighter around the throne. The figure bellowed that the test had begun, and only one would remain standing. Alina stepped forward, her fear burning away, replaced by fire in her heart, for she knew that the battle before her was not just for Eldermore, but for every soul bound in silence, fire, and shadow, and she swore she would not falter. Alina faced the figure as the hall cracked beneath their clash, the throne of bone shattering as streams of golden light fought against coils of shadow. The air trembled, the ground shook, and her lantern burned with a fury brighter than ever before. The figure rose higher, its body unraveling into storms of black mist, its voice filling every corner of the chamber, declaring that she could not destroy it, for it was not merely a creature, but the hunger of Eldermore itself, the greed, the lies, the sacrifices of centuries made flesh and darkness. Alina steadied her breath, her hands trembling, but her spirit unbroken. She shouted that hunger could consume but truth could cleanse her words, ignited the lantern which blazed into a sun, flooding the hall with fire of light. The shadows shrieked, pulling back, yet they surged again, forming monstrous shapes, clawed beasts with burning eyes, each one leaping to tear her apart. She raised the lantern and the light struck them down, but each strike drained her strength. Her knees buckled, yet she pushed forward, remembering the faces of the vanished, who waited for her beyond the veil. The figure laughed at her struggle, saying she was just one girl against the weight of history. But Alina cried that history could be rewritten by courage. She hurled the lantern's flame into the heart of the throne, and light exploded, tearing through the mist. For a moment she saw the truth. Beneath the shadow, hollow core, a chain forged from the souls of countless sacrifices, binding the kingdom in darkness. She realized then that to break it, she must not only fight, but choose. She could sever the chain by offering herself to take the place of the 300, or she could burn the chain, entirely risking the collapse of Eldermore itself. The choice tore at her, yet in the roar of battle she lifted her hand. Her heart steady, she whispered that no kingdom built on sacrifice deserved to stand, and her lantern flared one final time, unleashing a storm of light that struck the chain. The hall shook as if the world itself was breaking. The figure screamed its form, unraveling into nothingness. The throne cracked apart, and the chains snapped into shards that vanished like smoke. Alina fell to her knees, the lantern shattering in her hand, yet a soft glow still lingered around her. She looked up and saw the faces of the 300, no longer shadows, but free, their eyes clear, their voices rising in a song of gratitude. They reached for the sky and dissolved into light, returning to the world beyond the veil. Alina wept with relief, yet also fear, for as the chains dissolved, the hall itself collapsed, the land of shadow crumbling into dust. She stood weak but unyielding, whispering that whatever awaited beyond, she would face it as she had faced every trial with truth in her heart. The darkness fell away, and she felt herself pulled upward, carried by the last spark of the lantern into a new dawn, where her destiny was still unfinished. Alina opened her eyes and found herself lying upon the broken stones of Eldermore, her body weak, her hands trembling, yet the air around her was filled with light. Where once shadows had ruled the town that had been silent for so long, now stirred as if awakening from a long dream. People emerged from their homes, their eyes wide with wonder, for the vanished had returned. Families cried out in joy, children ran to the arms of parents once lost. The streets that had echoed with grief now trembled with laughter and tears. Yet though joy spread across Eldermore, Alina felt no peace within her heart, for she remembered the throne shattering, the chains snapping, and the truth she had spoken, that no kingdom built on sacrifice deserved to stand. As she rose, unsteady, she saw the king upon the balcony of his palace, his face pale, his crown heavy, his voice trembling, as he declared that the curse had been broken by the courage of one girl, and that Eldermore would honor her forever. But Alina felt the weight of his words and knew they were another mask for the truth. The curse had been fed by kings like him, and though the shadow was gone, the hunger of men still lingered. She lifted her voice and spoke to the people, telling them that the chains had not been broken by magic alone, but by the strength of every life that refused to be forgotten. She declared that no king should hold power over a people whose blood had been bargained for. Centuries' silence fell across the square. The king froze his guards. Uncertain, the people turned their eyes to her, and in that moment, Alina saw hope, a spark that had been hidden beneath fear, now burning brighter than the lantern ever had. The king shouted in anger, calling her a traitor, but his words rang hollow, for the people no longer bowed to him. They raised their voices with hers, chanting her name, not as a queen, but as a bearer of truth. The guards lowered their blades, unwilling to strike. The very people they had sworn to protect. The crown slipped from the king's head, falling upon the stones and shattering, its jewels scattering like dust. Alina felt the weight of choice pressing again. She could take the throne and guide the kingdom herself, or she could leave it to the people to decide their own fate. She closed her eyes and remembered the trials, silence, fire, shadow each had taught her not to seek power but to carry truth. She raised her hand and told the people that Eldermore would no longer kneel to thrones, but would rise together as one. The crowd erupted with voices united. The king fled his palace, vanishing into the night, and for the first time in centuries, Eldermore breathed free. Alina looked to the sky, the first true dawn rising over the land, her heart both heavy and light, for she knew her journey was not ended. The shadow was gone, but beyond the horizon, other kingdoms, other thrones, still bargained in silence. She whispered to herself that she would walk until every chain was broken, and with steady steps, she left the square, disappearing into the morning light, her story only beginning. Alina walked away from Eldermore as the first rays of dawn stretched across the sky, her feet weary, yet her spirit unbroken. Behind her the town echoed with voices rising in freedom, but before her lay the endless horizon filled with shadows, yet unseen. She carried no lantern now, only the light that had taken root within her heart, the memory of silence. Fire and shadow still pressed upon her mind, each trial a scar, but also a flame, guiding her steps. She journeyed across valleys where rivers glimmered with forgotten songs, through forests where trees whispered of ancient wars, and across mountains where the wind carried the cries of kingdoms still chained by greed. In every village she passed, people gathered to hear her story. Some looked upon her with awe, others with fear, yet in their eyes she saw the same question: could their chains, too, be broken? Alina never promised them miracles. She told them only that truth was heavy, but it was the only weight worth carrying, and that no throne, no crown, no ruler fed on sacrifice could last forever. Word of her spread across the lands. Some called her the flame-bearer, others the oath-breaker. Some whispered she was chosen by the gods, while others claimed she was cursed by shadows. Yet Alina walked on, never seeking titles, only listening, only guiding, only reminding people that their strength was their own. She reached the borders of distant realms where kings still bargained in secret, where temples still demanded blood, and where the cries of the innocent were drowned by the sound of golden coins. She saw armies raised, not to protect, but to enslave. She saw people bowed, not by reverence, but by fear, and she felt the same fire that once burned in the trials surge again within her heart. One night, beneath a sky lit by countless stars, she stood upon a hill overlooking a vast kingdom bound in silence, and she whispered to herself that her journey had never been about Eldermore alone. It had been about every voice stolen, every life traded, every chain forged. In the name of power, she spread her arms, feeling the wind rise around her, and in that wind she heard the voices of the 300, not lost, but forever with her, guiding her steps, urging her forward. She vowed aloud that she would not rest until the world itself was free, until no throne could stand upon sacrifice, until truth itself sat upon every heart. Her words rose into the night carried by the stars, and as she descended the hill, the ground beneath her glowed faintly, as though the world itself had begun to awaken. Alina walked into the distance, her shadow long behind her, her light burning ahead, her name carried on the lips of those who dreamed of freedom. Her journey unfinished, yet eternal, for she had become not only the seeker of truth, but its living flame.